Well, it's time for Damien and I's favourite part of any episode of High Performance, the chance to meet the people and speak to the people who are listening to the podcasts. And this is a really fun one for me because I'm about to speak to someone who's not only the son of a guest who's been on the podcast, not only a man that runs a business that I've actually invested in, but also my neighbour. So it feels a bit odd, Ollie, that I'm talking to you in my house. Damien's in his house and you're in your house. And I could have just crossed over the road, had this conversation with you. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good. No, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Right. So obviously people will be going, oh, I see. Jake's invested in SkiYodl, Ollie's business, and therefore he's getting Ollie on the podcast to get more people. The truth is, though, you're here because of what High Performance has done for you as an entrepreneur. So would you mind just sort of basically sharing your journey from, when you lived in London and you were employed to what's going on now?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. So yeah, like real short story. I used to run a ski school in the Alps and lived in the Alps for 10 years and then came back to work in the city in London and kind of during that period of like being on the consumer end of the ski market, I kind of found it bizarre that the ski market hadn't really caught up with the rest of the sort of the travel market in terms of how technology had embraced the whole sort of travel market as a whole. You can book a flight on Skyscanner anywhere around the world. You can go on to booking.com, Airbnb, and the ski market was kind of stuck in its ways in terms of still having to phone up agencies and spend days waiting for listing availability and being able to book. So it was kind of during that period that there was an opportunity for me in terms of where my career was to actually go and set up a company and try and bring technology into the space for the better.
So, Ollie, a lot of people might have that idea where they see this potential opportunity, but actually taking it from an idea to execution and taking that risk when it sounds like you had a good job working in the city is the bit that's doing the heavy lifting for me. I'm interested in, tell us a little bit about taking that risk and the courage required to do that.
My wife and I kind of had long discussions about it. She was employed at the time, and it probably was like the only real kind of opportunity where we just had our first kid, and it was a massive risk, but it was something I was passionate about. It was an idea that I knew that there was a genuine gap in the market, and if we did it well, if we did it right, then actually we could scale it quite quickly. To answer your question, the timing was right, but I had no idea how difficult it was going to be.
So tell us about the difficulties then. Sorry, Jake.
That's right. I think firstly, the biggest challenge for us for me was, we were building a tech company. I'm, as I say to quite a lot of people, probably one of the least techie founders of a tech company you'll come across. So actually not having that initial kind of CTO, chief technical officer type support at the very beginning. So I think, that was sort of the hardest bit is then going out there and finding that, that's kind of support network. And then it's actually just some of the bits that I didn't envisage to be so hard. Things like, building a team and managing a team. I've always felt sort of naturally I'll be good at that. And I think there are times where I've really doubted myself. Making daily decisions that can have a huge impact on the success of the business and the direction of the business. And one of the big things again as a tech company is raising investment. When you kind of combine those all together and it's kind of everything's kind of on your shoulders as a single founder, it can be a lonely place at times. And I think that's where, if I'm being honest, High Performance has had such an impact. Both, I'd say, I'll be honest, positively and negatively for me. And when I say negatively, it comes down to the fact that when I'm doing well with work, I love listening to your podcast. I thrive off it, I buzz off it. But actually, when my biggest fear in life, I had this whole fear of failing. And when I'm not doing so well, that negativity kicks in, and that's when I don't tune into the podcast. But actually, that's when I need it most. But I do.
Why do you think then that you don't tune into it when things are a struggle?
Because I'm almost like, it's really hard to explain. But when my confidence is being knocked, I find it difficult to then tune into the pod, and I kind of hear these stories and go, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't achieve what these guys are now saying on the podcast. And so it almost has a sort of a negative, connotation on how I feel, which is ridiculous, because it's like going for a run or jumping on a tennis court when you're feeling low. Chloe kicks me out of the house and says, go for a run. And of course it makes you feel better. And it's the same as the podcast. And it is for me, it has been, I love listening to it. And, but there are times where I find it a struggle.
So tell us about the kind of pressures that you do put on yourself then, because that's a really intriguing response. Now, we've obviously had your brilliant dad on the podcast as one of our guests. Is some of it about living up to his expectations?
I'll tell you a quick story, which
Go on.
I always envisaged I'd be in the army. I joined the army. I was grown up in an army background. I lived in army camps all my life. I went, and I always thought I was going to join the army. Everyone said, what are you going to do? I'm going to join the army. I'm going to join the army. I didn't think I ever really meant it. And Jake knows me, and he might be like, "Oh, you've been the worst army officer ever." But yeah, I always said I would. And so I went and did my RCB whilst my father, so the Regular Commissions Board, to become an army officer. And I've never really told anyone. Well, people don't know this, but I mean, my dad was head of the army at the time, so I kind of went to this, to the Regular Commission Board and 200 other, potential officers there, and it's a 2-day test. And being a Dannatt, and it is a surname that is a bit different, people kind of knew who I was, and it caused a bit of attention. And I failed my Regular Commission Board. I didn't get into Sandhurst to be an army officer. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced in my adult life, because I just felt so embarrassed. It was the embarrassment of it all. Because everyone knew I was going. Everyone knew, people that were there were like, "Oh, Ollie Dannatt, General Dannatt's son." And all my mates like, "Oh, you're going to Sandhurst." And I told everybody I was going to go to the army. At the time, I was teaching skiing out in the Alps, so I kind of came back to do this. And I think deep down, I think the other thing as well is, as a ski instructor, maybe at the time, I didn't feel like I was in a career that was, that my parents maybe thought was the right career, and which is totally ridiculous when I look back at it now, because actually what I was doing out there and achieving and playing to my skill set as someone that's quite dyslexic, but has that skill set to communicate with people well. I loved that, and it was the best 8-10 years of my career and my growing, and I suppose it's my growing up. So as a challenge, it was definitely that was failing RCB was just and I look back at that still quite negatively. It had a massive impact, and I think you would talk about podcasts. My favorite podcast is the one you did with Joss Butler. I'm also a big cricket fan, but instead of I do worry about failing and things like failing my RCB and the impact that had on me. But what Joss said about instead of worrying about what happens if you fail, flip that and flip that to what happens if everything goes right. That kind of sort of fuck it mentality in terms of failing on my terms. And I think that's really helped me with where we are in the business right now, is just committing to what I believe in. Continuing to make decisions, and then ultimately being honest to yourself, to the team, and to my investors. And I think out of all the podcasts I listen to, Joss is the one that a lot of that just sort of really hit home.
I just want to wrap up by talking about community, because I know that as we speak, there's a crowd fundraise going on for SkiYodl, which is your business. I think trying to bring people on the journey with you is such an important part of what high performance stands for. And I kind of get the impression that actually SkiYodl was kind of similar, just building a community and not running a business in an old fashioned way where you're like, we're a business, we're successful, you all come and spend your money, but instead creating a business where the people listening to this conversation can be investors, but can be more than that. They can genuinely be part of the business. Why do you think that is such an important part of entrepreneurship in modern business?
Community for us is so important. And fundamentally, we're building this company that I want our customers to own, and is accessible to everyone. Our community, we did a fundraise 2 years ago, and I think it's a hugely important part of what we're doing as a company. Something that I really believe in is just growing this community, not just here in the UK in terms of building our investors, but also all of the small businesses out in the Alps, and giving them a voice, the local guys that have ski shops and ski hire and ski instructors and massage companies. And we want to bring, the community here that want to be part of what we're doing, but then championing the voices of those businesses out in the Alps at the same time. So it's a really exciting period for us.
I love that, Ollie. I think that's one of the big things that we found on the podcast, is creating that community that lifts and inspires and supports each other is where the real good stuff happens. So thank you so much. I'm really inspired by listening to it.
No worries. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.